Hello, today's video is called Gaslighting the Inquiry. Today is day 8 of the public inquiry to the federal government for invoking the Emergency Act on February 2022. Today is October 24, 2022. The agenda for today is overview, key details, today's witness, and my point of view. As everybody knows, we're doing the daily review of the witnesses that are providing testimonies in this inquiry to seek to understand if Justin Castro had valid reasons to invoke the Emergency Act, and number 2, if the powers were overused and exceeded the scope that are granted in the Act. Based on these findings, the lead commissioner is going to put forward a recommendation in English and French to the federal government by February of next year. This is not a trial, it's an inquiry. All my videos are available on YouTube, Lisa Bruce Research, as well as my own website, lisabruceresearch.com. And here is the link to the live feed and the repository of previous inquiry sessions, and you can also access that yourself. In order to help with the understanding of all the information we have seen so far, and also the information that is going to be put forward in the future, I put together a recap, and we're going to look into the different parties that were involved, as well as some key timelines and maps. As everybody knows, there were multiple parties involved in the development of the situation, and most importantly, there were multiple jurisdictions that were overlapping and creating a lot of chaos, not only within the organization of the police force, but also in context of the convoy, because there was not a clear plan, and we're going to see it was from both ends of the situation. First, we have on the left the OPP, Ontario Provincial Police. You can see that they have a blue line on the pants. We have also the Ottawa Police Service with the red line. We have the RCMP with the yellow line. We also had the Police Liaison Teams, PLT for short form. And today it was discussed that apparently there were 14 people involved in this group, including 2 sergeants, and they play a very important role in the negotiations with any type of protesters, in this case, with the convoy, with the civilians, and with the police. And finally, we also had on the ground the Parliament Protection Services, and you can see here that they identify with the logo on the back. Here is a key timeline. On day 1 was January 29. Here on Monday, the 31st, is when it's declared that it's no longer a protest, but it's an occupation. Here on the 6th Sunday is when the infamous situation on Coventry Road took place, when some fuel was seized and some arrests were made. It was also the day when the municipal state of emergency was declared. Then the next Sunday, the Ambassador Bridge was cleared after 1 week of having been blocked. And then on Monday, date 14, is when the act gets invoked. And on the next day, Chief of Police slowly resigns. And the following day, on Wednesday, the 16th, you have Steve Bell, the interim Chief of Police, that is still active as we speak. Then on Saturday, the 19th, is the infamous incident with the horses. And then by Monday, everybody was mostly gone. The act is revoked on Wednesday, the 23rd, and the state of emergency for the city of Ottawa in its municipal coverage is lifted on the 24th. Some key locations: this is the center of the protest on Parliament Hill. This is the Rideau Center, where we hear that there were some French-aggressive protesters. I don't know, because I wasn't there, so I can't talk about that specific area. Coventry Road, I never visited either, but it's when the gas was seized and the arrests were made on February 6th. And here is the Highway 417 that connects Ottawa with the rest of the country. So those are key elements that keep on being repeated through the different witnesses. Now let's talk about previous testimonies not involving the police force, from good to bad. I call a good witness somebody who comes across as truthful, and in my particular case, building a case for not invoking the act. The best of all witnesses so far is within the not police force, Steve Kay, who is the city manager of Ottawa. He provided his testimony on day 3, and he even met with Tom Marazzo, that was one of the convoy organizers, who, by the way, was never arrested. Also very good, in my opinion, Kim Ayotte, day 4. He's the general manager for the emergency services. He provided information about the fact that the routes were not closed, so all the potential emergencies could have been covered. Also very good, in my opinion, Serge Arpan, day 3, the chief of staff. He actually provided pictures showing that the streets were empty, while certain politicians were still claiming there were a lot of trucks on the ground. Bad for me was the chief of the OPS board, Diane Deans, from day 5. She actually corroborated there were some leaks of information from her board to other sources. So obviously that doesn't make her very reliable in terms of being able to be part of a plan, and also tried to put in charge a new chief of police without the major buy-in, and taped him, and I'm talking about the major, taped the major without his consent. So not impressed. I have something called caught in the middle. I heard the testimony of the business improvement area. I didn't find them either here or there, so I'll call them caught in the middle as well. The first resident, that was the very first testimony that we heard, that is here. And I have here out of day 2, what I call agently, because in theory this 21-22-year-old lady provided enough information to the police to be able to create an injunction. So obviously I don't believe that's true. I think that's a plant. That's just me. Awful, the city councilors from day 2, Fleury and McKinney, they were caught on tape obstructing justice. So that's pretty sad, because this entity is trying to be mayor of Ottawa as of today. I think it's when the voting takes place. So if this entity wins, well, we know it's not a good thing. And beyond awful so far, Major Watson from day 4, he talked about racist flags and desecrating Terry Fox. For those of you, I noticed that 50% of my audience actually is not in Canada. So Terry Fox was a very interesting historic figure who, having a major disease, was able to run across the country, and it's a very important symbol in the history of Canada. Here is the Terry Fox statue that is in front of Parliament Hill, and this is what this major calls to be desecrated. You have a cap. This white that you see here is actually snow. This is the Canadian flag. That's a racist flag for him. This is the Canadian flag, and a very clean mandate freedom sign. So that is what the type of inconsistencies, unfounded accusations that this mayor actually provided in his witness statement. Also here you can see how he's sharing in social media his disgust to anyone who was supporting the truckers. In this case, there were some politicians from Saskatchewan. So beyond awful in my eyes. Previous testimony from the police force by rank, all good in my opinion. So we have Patrick Morris from OPP, from Intelligence, day 5, day 6 and 7, Craig Abrams from Strategic Operations, day 7, Carson Party, OPP, and you have the highest ranking we have heard so far from day 6 is Patricia Ferguson from OPS. Now, the summary as I see it is the following. There are some things that everybody agrees upon. The first one is that this was an unprecedented action, extremely big, not only because of the size, but also because of the different type of people that were involved. You can see here images of the highways that were very moving throughout the passing of the convoy through different cities. It was also risky, and I understand that there were fireworks and fire and gas, etc., in situations where potentially could have created an issue. Luckily, nothing happened, but I understand that part. Also, the inability of the Ottawa Police Service to manage the big crowds. Certain documents talk about 3,000 people, more than 3,000, and the police force in the city of Ottawa is less than 1,500 officers. So clearly it's something that is not manageable. And finally, the fact that slowly the chief of police in charge at the time of this convoy was the wrong leader for this situation. And he was the wrong leader for a series of reasons. He didn't use the intelligence. That were certain reports that were saying that there was a long-term intent of the convoy to stay. He allowed all the vehicles to get into downtown. His leadership skills are subpar. We have multiple witnesses saying he was extremely unable to build positive relationships, both internally within the department and also with the new incoming forces that were trying to help. The plans he created were not feasible, and he had an inability to see the big picture and the impact of operations such as the one in the Ambassador Bridge that was also in the province of Ontario to incorporate this in the plan. So all this created a level of chaos that contributed overall to the invocation of the Emergency Act. What is required to invoke the Emergency Act? There are 4 different ways of doing it: espionage, foreign activities, threat of use of violence, or violence against property. So these two that are circled are the ones that every single person that is supporting the invoking of the act will use to try to substantiate the reason why it took place. We're going to see two positions through the whole inquiry. Some group of people are going to say that it was necessary to invoke the Emergency Act. That includes the councillors, the mayor, the chief of police, government of Canada, and the city of Ottawa. And a group of people that is going to say it was not necessary, such as the police intelligence. We even are going to see today the RCMP is going to say they did not agree with invoking the act less than 24 hours from doing it. The Convoy Coalition, obviously, and the governments of Saskatchewan and Alberta. Today we had only one witness, and it was between 9:30 to 6:30 p.m. His name is Steve Bell. He is the interim chief of police of Ottawa and was also the interim chief of police as soon as Lowly resigned in the week of February, right after the invocation of the act. I can't even explain how bad this was. I can't even understand how this person is allowed to come into this inquiry and gaslight everyone. And for reference, for those of you who are not familiarized with the term gaslight, is to negate the reality that is obvious in the context of your perception or documents in this case, and say that is not true, that doesn't make sense, etc., just to try to confuse you. So just to understand his role before becoming the chief of police was in terms of intelligence, information, and investigation. But in this part of the commissioner's counselor, he was focusing on the intelligence, because it's important to understand that he failed to incorporate all the intelligence that was provided to him. So in terms of structure, he was in charge of strategic planning. The operational was by somebody by the last name Peterson. We haven't heard of him. Patterson, sorry. And then tactical was Bryden, and again, we haven't heard from him. So what is important is that he received the infamous Hendon report, and we spoke about the Hendon report being all the intelligence that was compiled in one document, and he received it apparently, and he never read it for 2 weeks. So obviously it was already circulating, and he didn't see it, or he didn't think it was important, or he was very busy doing something else. I don't know. He never told us. And you can see here from the original document that the convoy will be able to stop and effectively shut down movement if they desire. And you have a portion that is redacted. So you can imagine when you redact information, is because there's sensitive information you don't want the public to know. So the point being is, if you redact something, is key. And this is in the report, and he said, well, I didn't read it. So if he's in charge of intelligence, makes absolutely no sense. Now, interesting to note, today we had 2 instances on which the internet was down. So I find that very interesting. Here you can see how in the document it says that it's a threat that is considered medium, but there is a possibility that international terrorism could occur. His interpretation of this is that no critical intelligence would suggest that any sort of violent act will take place, and there was no concern regarding any type of violence. So you can see how from the beginning of his testimony, this was at the very beginning of the morning, he's contradicting everything that we have in writing and also what the other witnesses have been saying from day one. Here he said that Morris in his report said that the convoy was going to stay, and Bale says all the information was saying that it was just 3 days. That's not true. I've seen the report, we've seen the report, and obviously that's not true. Then it says that the convoy was very lawful while they were moving to Ottawa, so therefore there wasn't any concern, because even if they would stay, then it's not going to be a big deal because they are law obeying. So obviously that doesn't make sense, because even in businesses, you build 3 scenarios. You build a optimistic, a pessimistic, and a realistic. So to say that an intelligence person that is in charge of the whole division of the police is saying, oh, I didn't contemplate that option, is actually either naive or just simply not true. Here we have, he was in charge of intelligence, the documents reported key information. He failed to incorporate that information, and he denied the need to incorporate that intelligence. So obviously, this is the part that I don't understand, why when you even have a document that is showing clearly that is stating these facts, he continues to deny. So you can imagine, if you don't have documents, how easy it is to deny, from his perspective, of course. I wrote here, he's a walking contradiction, says it's unprecedented, but didn't expect them to stay. He assumed they would leave by Sunday. So you can see how that doesn't make any sense. So it's unprecedented, but they're going to follow the logic from other protests. Well, that doesn't make any sense. Nobody anticipated, and these are his words, not mine, the trauma and the violence to the community as it was not seen in transit to the city. Again, not true. Slowly was not communicating internally, and I don't know if Slowly didn't understand the structure or he was in a rush and failed to communicate to his internal people, but he called for a conference call, and then he didn't tell the people that he was going to go on TV and talk about the possibility of disclosing to a community that there was a possibility of closing the bridges, and then all the OPS and OPP were not involved. So clearly there was an internal communication that was not working here. The strategic input was given to Bell. Remember when Patricia was off and Slowly gave her 2 days, Friday and Saturday off. She returned on Sunday, the 13th, and then she was not in the loop. So all the strategic input was going to Bell instead of Patricia Ferguson. The Superintendent Bernier, who is an operational commander, came up with a plan, and then he actually executed very well. I don't know how true is that only one person came up with a plan. If many failed to see and build a good plan, how can a single individual come up with a fantastic plan? Doesn't make sense to me. Talked about the PLT, talking about the fact that they're very effective normally. He was coughing all the time. I don't know what is with that. I found that incredibly interesting. McKinney wanted the RCMP to take over the policing of the parliament. Remember McKinney? This is the entity that wants to be the next mayor of Ottawa. And obviously that's not grounded in law, so that entity doesn't understand law. And also I want to reiterate this, it was caught on tape that there was obstructing of justice. So not a good look. Now, what I liked about him, the only thing I liked about Bell, is that he was consistently asking the counselor what date, what document, when did this happen, because multiple times the counselor say, oh, I think it's blah, blah, blah date, and then actually it was not. So very important to ground the information on the actual dates. They confirmed that Abrams was raising concerns, but Bell is not able to be accountable, and then and by he, I mean Abrams was saying in his testimony that there were some people that were sitting down and doing nothing. And instead of Bell saying, listen, that was a major flaw, I acknowledge that that happened, he was saying, oh, everything has been corrected. So it's just brushing it off, no accountability ever. There was a meeting of negotiations that were kept secret from Bernier. And remember, he is the operational commander. If he doesn't know there's some conversations and negotiations going on, how is he going to be able to deploy even the best of plans? So very odd. And then here they were saying, why didn't you communicate to Bernier? And then they say, oh, because we thought that not all truckers would move. I just don't even understand how he can answer this way. Bernier was not informed. And here you can see how when you look at the layers of the different responsibilities, the negotiations were responsibility of the operational team, and Bernier was the operational commander. So he should have been in charge of the negotiations. And then the way Bell explained is that, oh yes, but strategic took over operation. What? Why? That doesn't make any sense. Like all the things he said were absolutely absurd from beginning to end. Here you would not believe it, but this is the chief of police and he's being asked, do you think that you fail in this situation? Oh, I think that fail is a very strong word. You're the chief of police. You have to be able to use that word. And then he said, well, there was a confrontation that took place. Oh, confrontation is a strong word. Like, I don't even understand where this is coming from. So here you can see there is reference to the aggressiveness that this Slowly counselor showed towards Abrams when Abrams was saying, I recall slowly saying, if I need 100 people, I will ask for 200. And then here, slowly counselor asked Steve Bell, do you remember that? And he said, no, I don't remember that. So of course he's not going to remember. I put this just as a reference. One of the people we're going to talk about later, or maybe another day, is Drummond, and you can see their salary. So these people are relatively well paid, particularly after 2.5 years of the economy being oppressed. They were talking about the PLT and some details about it. Example of how difficult Bell was as a witness. So slowly counselor is asking, were the residents angry? And then Bell said, oh, I wouldn't say they were angry. They were hurt and they were harmed. And then I'm sure that you all know what a word salad is. It's when you throw a lot of words that mean absolutely nothing. And he kept on going. And then he said, well, they were angry because X, Y, Z, whatever. So again, gaslighting all the time. Then the city of Ottawa did the cross-examination, and he was asked for specific examples of what type of non-anticipated behavior was displayed during the presence in Ottawa by the convoy that they were not expecting from the police perspective. 24/7 honking, idle vehicles, assault. Believe me, there's no assault. Even their own records say, I'm going to see it in a minute, there was only one person that was charged with assault with a weapon. Intimidation, constant conflict between the residents and them, and you're going to see. Today I loved the cross-examination of the convoy, because you're going to see that all that he said is going to be a contradiction. Example of lack of accountability. Well, you didn't read the handling report between January 13 and January 27, asked the OPP counselor. And then he's reluctant to say that even if he would have read it, it would have been beneficial. Like, how is that even possible? But again, you can see here, it's just incredible. The whole thing was just incredible. Reluctancy to take responsibility. So Bell says that the Hendon report only talks about the weekend activities, that they were going to leave after the weekend. And then the OPP counselor says, well, show me in the report that it was saying that it was only weekend activities, because there is no reference anywhere. And I agree with that. When Morris was showing the report, he was clearly stating there was a likelihood of staying even up to Feb 4. There's a date in that report. And then finally, when they pulled the report, he said, okay, it's just incredible. I don't understand. The plan should use the intelligence, but the plan was not using the Hendon report, says the OPP counselor. Can we pull it now? So again, he doesn't admit there are gaps in the intelligence, and he doesn't admit that the intelligence from the Hendon report that was obviously his responsibility to read and understand should have been incorporated in the plan. Children Aid Society was not involved, according to Bell. I don't know. I heard in the previous day, that they were threatening the truckers with $5,000 fine and the removal of their kids, which in my world is a big no-no. You don't let anyone touch your kids. But again, this was, denied by Bell. He was asked about something very important. There are multiple witnesses that they say that they were pulled out of the city without any kind of protection, and they were not charged, and they were released in the middle of a road without a mobile, without proper way of doing anything. So his answer was, I was not aware. So again, denying. Violence. The residents felt, there was not actual violence, they felt. It's not in the criminal code, but they felt it was violent. So you can see how dangerous this statement is. He's the chief of police. He can't go by feelings. He should go by the law. He's telling you under oath, he swore on the Bible, that this is what he did. He acted upon feelings, not the law. Very scary. Very interesting. When they were pulling the evidence and the documents for every single counselor, it took maybe, I'm going to say 15 to 20 seconds max. Every time the convoy counselor was asking for evidence, it took, in one instance, I counted over 2 minutes. So to me, either it's passive aggressive or it's clear sabotage. Here you can see from this document, from the cross-examination, from the convoy, I really loved him today. He was really good. He showed the recap of all the charges that has been presented at least once in the past. And then the Ottawa police says, well, the witness hasn't had the opportunity to review this evidence, so it shouldn't be introduced. So luckily, it was admitted because you can prove here very quickly that there were only 5 violent offenses between January 29 to February 13. So it just talks about the nature of the convoy that is not violent. And here, once again, he says, well, that's unprecedented violence. Sorry, the convoy counsel says, well, that's not unprecedented violence. There's no violence because there's only 5 violent offenses and only 1 with a weapon. And Bell responded, well, it's not in the criminal code, but the trauma was felt. Again, very scary. It's just very scary, man. The RCMP, we have an email from the commissioner of the RCMP, Lucky, who, by the way, is on the news for another reason, not exactly the most interesting character to look at, but I can't get into that right now. On February 13 at 7:25 p.m., she was not supporting the invoking the Emergency Act. So you have even the highest level of federal within the police structure not supporting this. We have it in writing, 7:25 p.m., February 13. It's here. And then Bell continues saying, we had a plan and we were going to execute it, and the Emergency Act just gave us the platform to do it. So obviously he didn't answer the question of the convoy, because the question was, did you have any other options other than the Emergency Act? What was Operation Bear Hug? So it was just to encircle Ottawa more so than downtown, so it was a bigger footprint. Do you think it was a tactical error not to consider a potential stay after the weekend? Well, something we have to do moving forward. So again, he cannot acknowledge. Another example of difficult witness and not accepting responsibility. So I'll leave it here so you can read because it's over 26 minutes, this video. Cross-examination. Again, I have to leave it here so you can read my point of view. Minus 10 billion over 10. This man gaslighted the whole evidence, not the whole evidence. He gaslighted the whole testimony, even with the evidence in front of him. And again, gaslight is the reality is there, either in writing, like in this case, or in front of your eyes, but the person is saying that is not the reality. Really sad day. I think it's very dangerous that the chief of police is saying that he can operate based on feelings. Thank you very much for listening.